Florida State has exceeded expectations for the 2025 recruiting class.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Today is National Signing Day, at least from a traditional perspective. The real one is in December, and we all know that. But Florida State added more players today. We're going to go over some of those. What they didn't get, Zahir Mathis, that's unfortunate, but this is recruiting. You don't win them all. But overall, here's the theme that I want to start with. Florida State was a team coming off a 2-win season, dragging its feet towards the finish line of recruiting, and they finished with 23 players. If you would have told me on the 15th of November that Florida State signed 23 players, I would have said one of two things. You're a liar, or Florida State took a lot of reaches. When I go through the recruiting class 1 through 10, kind of rank them myself, and then even look at the back half of the class, I'm not sitting there going, yeah, he's not going to play. Nah, there's no chance. Watching the film of all these kids, all of them have the ability to help the Noles. After winning 2 games, it really is surprising to me that Florida State made it to the level that they did along the recruiting trail. I thought it was going to be a disaster down the stretch, and they might make it to 15, 16 kids. And then in the back half here in January, early February, Florida State would take 1 or 2 other guys, maybe specialist, something like that, or a kid out of the JUCO ranks, something of that nature. We're going to go over some of the guys overall here in a few minutes. But before I get into that, just note overall, coming off of that season, Florida State has exceeded expectations. That is my first take, and I am steadfast with that. All right, now, the players that they added, just want to go over them again. They've committed in January, but more importantly, they signed in February. Chasten Brown, 6'7" offensive tackle out of Northside High School, Warner Robins, Georgia, one of the best areas for high school football in the United States. It's an area that Bowden really tried to covet. It's an area that Jimbo did. And honestly, any program in the South that doesn't, there's something wrong. Even schools up north have tried to hit this area, Ohio State, Notre Dame, etc., over the years because there's so much talent. Getting Chasten Brown late, a kid that Gus Malzahn, Herb Hand, and several other members now of the staff are familiar with, is a boom. FSU needs tackles. This kid has a lot of length. Yeah, he needs a year or so to get there, but you can't teach the physical tools. Big thumbs up, landing Chasten Brown. Number 2, Chavez Sandman Thompson, offensive lineman out of Cocoa, one of the best high school programs in Dixie and definitely in the Sunshine State. I always thought he was a better defensive lineman than offensive lineman long-term because he wasn't the tallest guy, but he can definitely play center, and it's something that he has done. What I like most about him is he's just a football player. This is the kind of guy that Bowden actually probably would have liked. He always liked quickness over size, and while Sandman's not small by any means, height is not ideal, but Bowden never worried about that. He wanted tenacity and athleticism above all else. That means this kid would have fit with Bobby's group, and I'm down with that. Also, again, playing with Coco, do not ever discount that. Sandman is now one of 4 players that Florida State adds to its class on the offensive line. By the way, it's about time Florida State started getting consistent offensive line classes. It starts with the class of 2025. Finally, the legendary player Antonio Cromartie, his son, Cromartie Jr. Antonio's little boy is no longer just that guy. I'm telling you now, he's one of the most underrated guys in this class, and I still don't understand why he was ranked where he was. He didn't have more offers. Played at Carrollton, physical kid, and can play multiple spots in the secondary. A little perplexed. Whatever the case is, I liked his film. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think he's going to contribute at Florida State. And above all else, it's cool to get Cromartie back in the fold. He's going to come to games. It's his kid. It's always good to have great players at Florida State and an NFL legend at that back on the sidelines in Tallahassee. So good for Florida State overall. Now, looking at the class, I just want to kind of cherry pick a few items and kind of go over some players just as a reminder of where Florida State's at as we head into the 26 group. I'll start talking more about 26 tomorrow and then a few other things that are going on with Florida State football. But this class, again, deserves credit, and it's probably going to be undervalued. It'll be ranked in the teens by most of the recruiting services once they finish everything. But I think that Florida State did pretty well, especially under the circumstances. Number one, again, 23 signees. They got Kevin Wynn, arguably the best defensive tackle in the country. That's not an easy get. Georgia wanted him, Tennessee, South Carolina, USC, all these programs across the country wanted this guy. And he could have easily went somewhere that didn't have 2 wins. He could have went to a playoff team, could have went to an Ohio State or a Miami, could have went to Florida. He could have went pretty much anywhere that he picked up the phone and called, said, I'm coming, they would have said yes. 6'2", 320 plus pounds, and he's a guy that can move his feet and plays with tenacity. I know Florida State is not, quote unquote, hurting for defensive linemen. They need some help, but it's not like they're dearth of talent either. But I guarantee you in some way, shape, or form, if he is healthy next fall, Kevin Wynn will help somewhere along the way. Can't teach the frame, can't teach the effort, and his athleticism at his size, Wynn is unusual. Florida State hit a home run with Kevin Wynn. Next, looking at the class overall, I could have went with a lot of different players, but because Florida State has struggled in the trenches lately, let's just stick right there. This is a player I know well because I've seen him live. I've had him on the show here on Locked On Seminoles, Mario Nash Jr. DeKalb, Mississippi, Kemper County. This is one of the best offensive tackles in the country. Again, even after all the coaching changes, Nash decided to stick with Florida State. Could have went to a lot of places. He wanted to go to LSU or Ole Miss, wanted to go to Arkansas, whatever he wanted to do, he could have done that. Nash decided to stick with his Florida State commitment. And if I had to guess, he'll be in the starting lineup his second year on campus. I don't like projecting freshmen to start on the offensive line. That is something I will openly state. But in some way, shape, or form, if he ends up in the starting lineup or at least playing some this year, it won't surprise me. Very intelligent young man, great feet, and he's played at a program that knows how to win. I think those are all attributes that are helpful. Oh, and here's the last point. When I saw him play, it was at the Under Armour event in Atlanta. It is undoubtedly the number one place in the country Under Armour goes for big guys. He was the best offensive tackle there that day at pass protecting against the elite defensive linemen. That is a great, great sign for Mario Nash. Now, as the class looks overall, you can look at it from a number of different ways in terms of who's next or what's most important, but a couple of notes. D-line here, they got 6, including a junior college player that can come in and help early. That's just so important. If you're going to get back to the point where you're a feared defense, which is historically what Florida State has been, it's got to start up front, right? Why would it not? That's the history of Florida State, and I'm not trying to be mean to some of the local team or the recent teams, but they didn't meet the expectations that they needed to. Tywayne Coleman is the kid that's a junior college player. Not a lot of guys know about him, but his film's legit. He's over 280 pounds. Maybe he plays strong side in, maybe he plays nose. He might be the most underrated guy in this class because he's a junior college player and it's not talked about as much. Grown man strength, multiple years away from high school, now coming to Florida State. This is important. Getting a guy like him in the class is going to help them. Overall, looking at the class, again, 6 defensive linemen is important. A lot of people are curious about what Jesse Harold, the kid out of Gaither High School. I never watched him live at a game, but I've seen enough of his film to know that he's a really twitchy kid. I don't know where he's going to end up in terms of a size, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up at a strong side end. He's got the frame to fill out, but if he stays at weak side, that's good too. What I do know is his first step and his length fit the position. I'm going to guess he's 225, 230 right now. Athleticism, is there. And that's the most important thing to note. Getting guys like him, even if they take a year or two, are vital to your program. Like I noted earlier, he's the kind of kid that Bobby would have taken 25 years ago at Florida State, and he would have been a really good player and had a good chance to go to the NFL. They had the right development. They knew how to deal with different types of personalities, and they adapted. That's what this Florida State staff's got to do too. Coach White and all those guys, they've got it going with the D-line recruiting, adding guys out of the portal and high school. This is a good sign. And again, Cleveland's a kid out of JUCO ranks. The D-line is really good. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the impact guys and continue on with this class. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, comedy show, football game, or anything else? Finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with Gametime Picks, it couldn't be easier. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you, curates all the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through all the endless tickets that you could get. I've been using Gametime Picks, and for a while now, it's been really easy. The best thing about it is finding your seat and being able to know what you want faster. It gets a few tickets that you can look at so you know what's best. Click on it, then click on your seat, and you can see the venue. Whether it's the stage to the theater, to the pitcher's mound, to the 50-yard line, to center court at a basketball game, you can view your seat. Ready to take your event to the next level? Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Florida State's recruiting class, again, exceeded expectations. If you take nothing away from this podcast, note that these 23 players are pretty darn good. And to be honest with you, I didn't think they were going to sniff where they ended up. Here's another guy that has a chance to make an impact early on in his career. He's what I would like to call a power slot. Javon Boggs, another kid from Cocoa, really strong kid, great hands. One of the best videos I took this past year was a video of Javon down in South Florida at the Miami Under Armour catching a one-handed pass on a bomb with a guy right on his heels. Coming across, catching it, it was just absolutely nasty. Maybe the best catch of the day. And we're talking about South Florida. The talent at receiver is ridiculous. Best catch of the day that I saw was Javon Boggs. He was absolutely electric. Next up, thinking about the opportunity to compete early, there's a lot of different ways you can evaluate that. But a guy that I think is, again, a little bit underrated, and I disliked him because I've seen him since his freshman year of high school, is Ethan Pritchard. Seminole High School in Sanford, just north of Orlando. It's one of the best programs in the state of Florida, year in and year out. It has been for a long time. Coach Lodge was there. He's moved on. He lives in South Carolina and coaches now, but their current staff is doing a good job. And Pritchard was a guy I knew was going to be good anyway. Well, he told me before the season, doesn't care if he plays Will, doesn't care if he plays Mike, doesn't care if he plays the overhang position. He just wants to play. I'm curious to see how Coach White and the entire defensive staff come up with different ways to use Pritchard, because I know he's a good blitzer and he's got a thumper's mentality, but he's not the biggest guy. So are they going to use him some as a specialist on nickel? Maybe on dime? That's possible. He's certainly a guy that has the physical traits to do those things. But most importantly with him, he's a guy that just wants to play football. Again, he said straight to my face, one-on-one, doesn't care where he plays, just wants to play for Florida State football. That's the right kind of guy to get. Another guy that I just think is a football player and again can play multiple spots, depending on the network you look at for his recruiting ranking and his position, Shamar Arnaud from Carrollton, Georgia, same high school as Cromartie, by the way. That's a kid that can play safety, nickel, or corner. Now, just as an example, 24/7 has him ranked as a corner. And that's fine. Maybe that's where he finds his home. Lord only knows Florida State can't get enough long corners. They've had a lot of success with him. And the secondary, to be honest, is clearly, in my opinion, the one position on the team where you're like, okay, they really don't need to hit the portal unless it's just an elite guy that wants to come to Tallahassee. They're good, just continuing to get the high school guys. And Arnaud is one of those players. They got him towards the end of the recruiting cycle. They flipped him. And to be honest with you, this is the kind of kid that Bowden would have loved too. Thin kid, 180-some pounds. He's 6'2", maybe taller. There's just an absolute endless amount of ways they can use him. Maybe he ends up being your boundary or your field corner. Maybe they flip sides. Maybe they don't. They might just play right and left. But if you wanted to put him on somebody that's a slot, because that's their dominant guy, Arnaud's a really good athlete, and I think he could adapt even to some of the smaller guys because he's got so much length. He's one of the players that I think has a chance to make an early contribution, so don't forget about him. As for a long-term situation that has kind of turned in his favor in a guy that, again, the junior college ranks, do not forget about them, that could be something that hits quickly for Florida State. Nobody knew who Jordan Scott was. He ends up at the junior college level, and Florida State has hit on him. 6'7", 215, Southwest Mississippi Community College. I like his film, and he catches a lot of passes in traffic, including the jump balls, but he could actually run routes. He's not just a 6'6", 6'7" guy. He could move his feet and get away from DBs. When you combine his height and length with that, there's a reason to really, really like Jordan Scott. Now, overall, again, Florida State's got a balanced class, and they've got a lot of different players that can play early. Those are just some of the guys that I think that could play early on. I mean, somebody like Tayshawn Gelsey is a big tight end recruit for some people, but Coach Norvell decided, hey, man, if you want to come here, we'll give you a chance at receiver. He's 215, 220 pounds, big body guy. You got Tylon Lee, another kid like Jesse Harold, really athletic player just outside of Pensacola at Pace High School. There are enough players like that in Florida State's class where in a year or so, we're going to be talking a lot about these kids. Chase Lofton. Now, Florida State just got two great tight ends last year. They get Chase Lofton out of Omaha, really talented player too. Do I think he's going to play a ton of reps right away? It's possible. I've kind of gone back and forth on it, but they've got two really good ones. We'll see how it goes this spring, but he's a very talented guy as well. Again, overall, though, the biggest thing from this is I'm still surprised Florida State ended up where they did with the class. I just go through the list. You had like Kevin Sperry towards the end at quarterback, an athlete that can play in Malzahn's scheme, really athletic guy, really. But they just didn't seem like they were headed that way. Then it just completely changed. Congrats to everybody at Florida State that made that happen, because this recruiting class in 2 or 3 years, if it ended up where I thought it was going to be, would have been a major harbinger of negative things to come. You'd be like, okay, when this group's a senior, we're going to be 6-6. It is what it is. They're not. They signed enough talent and have enough balance, enough defensive linemen, etc., O-linemen, everything. They got enough balance where they can compete. If this next 26 class is as good as I think, we're going to be talking about some opportunities for Florida State to end up being back on the map a lot quicker than I originally thought. Thank goodness for that, because I know I can't handle another 2-10 season or anything close to it. And I'm sure Noles fans agree with that. When we come back, we're going to talk about Duce Robinson, his comments. I have a little story that I want to kind of give a background on with him and why he's such an important player for Florida State. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. Duce Robinson is not your average everyday wide receiver. The transfer from Southern Cal is 6'6", roughly 220 pounds, and while he makes the wow catch, he makes the mundane play look easy. It's not one or the other that's important. It's both. He will beat you to death on inside slants. He will catch the pass over the top by using his body and his great hands, and he has the ability to run routes throughout the route tree. Florida State hasn't had that guy in a while that was just purely a natural receiver that had all those things coming in, and they knew it. Now, you can look back 2 years ago and say, well, Brian, what about those guys? They were really good. Don't get me wrong. They were great. But I think Duce is a better all-around receiver in terms of his route running. Excuse me. But now he's a guy that's going to be playing with a new quarterback, new system. There's a lot of different things we got to figure out. But I would just about guarantee you, if you had give me odds, even at 5-1, I'd say yes if you asked me to take the bet that he has the most spectacular plays of all the receivers this next year for Florida State. I don't think it'll be close. Florida State needs that kind of guy. And here's the backdrop. From Florida State's media, they had him do a press conference, and he was talking about growing up a Florida State fan. Ironically, his mom was a Gators fan, and him and his brothers rooted for the Noles. You know, his dad played for Florida State. And he was talking about Florida State in the national title game, and his dad hold him up when they beat Auburn and all this. One of his fondest memories. It's rare that I see a genuine guy like him. Now, I'd been around him when he was in high school and seen him at Elite 11 in LA a few years ago. Tremendous kid, just absolutely great guy. But it's different to see a kid that's made money. I know he made some serious cash at USC. He's getting paid handsomely to come to Florida State, and he's still as genuine as he is. I think if you're a Florida State fan, you know the following. There were some issues with NIL, the transfer portal, guys coming in who did or didn't get whatever they wanted for whatever reason it may be, and the locker room wasn't perfect. There's no way it was if you won 2 games at Florida State. You're not going to convince me otherwise. If you got the story posted on the comments below, but how would that be possible? There's no way they had a happy locker room and ended up 2-10. The bottom line, he's the kind of guy you need in your locker room, even if he's the worst player on the roster, and he's going to be one of the best. This is a good sign for Florida State football going forward. And again, kind of like with Cromartie, having a legendary player back around the program is one thing with him. While we're not talking about quite the same with Robinson, his dad was a good player. It's still good to have a former Nole back around the program, and his kid's a dude. He's a future NFL player. Florida State's probably going to get him for 1 year, but they're lucky to get that. This is a good sign for Florida State football. They need to take advantage of him on the gridiron and off. Interviews, publicity, anything they can do, and I'm sure they will. Florida State should promote everything with Duce. He's the kind of guy you want representing the school you went it to. If you're a Noles fan and for whatever reason you get a chance to run into him at a restaurant in Tallahassee, or if you get a chance to sit down with him at some kind of NIL event or whatever, you're going to enjoy it. I'm telling you right now, Duce Robinson is a great guy, and he's the kind of person, unfortunately, I don't get to interview enough because he's just fun and open-ended. When a lot of guys don't want to be interviewed at all, he went out of his way to be good to media and everybody else. Duce Robinson is awesome. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that like button, that notification bell, subscribe, and share this podcast. I'd love to get in front of more Florida State fans. I will see you again on Thursday. Take care.